Skooma has long since ravaged many minds, planting the seed of destruction in countless families and communities. Since its conception eras ago, even my home here in Eldenroot has faced many issues regarding the substance. I'm Sabal Black Sheep, have you any soul? No sir, no sir. But I do have time today to share with you a horrifying skooma story I found on Silit's s/skooma board. This one is by user Dunmerzitties33. I never grew up around much substance use outside of my father's sujama addiction. I didn't pay much mind to it. We lived on the outskirts of Avec City in a kind of rundown part of the island. We were mud crabbers. Made fine enough money to keep food on the table, but when I was 42, some parasite wiped out most of the mud crabs in our local area. Made hunting and selling pretty hard. So I started looking for work elsewhere to support my family. My father said my granduncle ran a shipping dock down in Vivek City, and he set me up with a job. The pay was shit, and I had to work around a lot of scalebacks, but I met this Khajiit guy while working. Let's call him Sumdar. He was a funny guy, made working for barely 3 septims a day almost worth it. He was in a rougher crowd in the city. He asked me to hang out with him and some of his buddies a few times. I normally found an excuse to avoid it. Yeah, he was funny, but kind of a weird guy. After weeks of coming home to my dad drunker than a guar and my mother's incessant nagging, spending a night out on the town with some furbacks didn't seem half bad. Looking back, I realize how stupid I truly was. The next Fredas, I accepted Sumdar's eager offer to drink with him and some of his friends, to wine over moon sugar wine, or what he called it at least. But Sumdar led me to some rundown house in downtown. The outside looked relatively nice, just unkempt, vines overtaking the balcony and the cob starting to chip in some areas. Though it was hard to see in the dark. When we had walked in, I was hit with this thick stench of incense and booze, and this strange sugary smell that burned my nostrils. Smoke hung in the air, slow and snaking around the movement of this den of catfolk. Almost put Red Mountain to shame, I thought. Sumdar introduced me to a few of his friends. They were quite welcoming people and were quick to hand me a drink and usher me into their conversation. The Khajiit were blabbering on about some whorehouse in Belmora. I wasn't paying too close attention until one started handing out some strange pink bottle. I tuned back in to the conversation in hopes to understand what I was just handed. The Khajiit laughed their raspy feline laugh among themselves as one after the other took the strange-looking shot. I turned to Sumdar, hoping he'd read my confused and skeptical face. He glanced down at me with that dopey smile and told me to drink it. He said I'd like it. I thought, fuck it, why not? It's not like I have anything better to be doing. I removed the little cork and put the glass to my lips. A viscous, sickly, sweet liquid flooded my mouth. I coughed as if my body was retaliating against this unnatural substance. The cats burst out in drunken laughter at my supposed innocence. It burned my senses in a fuzzy haze. For a moment I had thought it was some cruel prank. When it hit me, my skin felt like silk, and each breath felt like Azora herself had embraced me whole. The first hit felt so profound, a high I'd been chasing for well over 5 decades now. I lost any sense of my surroundings as my mind went off on a journey so abstracted from the life I had lived prior. My veins rushed with utter euphoria till dawn break. As my beautiful sky faded back into the Khajiit's dingy ceiling, dread began to trickle in at the back of my throat until I was drowning in it. I knew I had to get up and work, yet my mind pierced in pain. I soon heard Sumdar. You were on quite the trip, weren't you, my friend? I was worried such a skinny man surely may find himself in the Zora's brace at the swing you took. His words met with his iconic, jovial chuckle. I groaned in pain as the dark Khajiit helped me to my feet. I don't remember much that happened that day. I just remember going back to the docks as I tried to ignore the throbbing pain in my head. But soon it subsided, and all I could think about is more. The memories and days faded into watercolor blur as I fell deeper and deeper into Simdar's friend group each following week. When I had learned it was skooma is what I had taken that night, I was in shock. Of course, I had heard about it, but I'd never seen it up close until then. Skooma became mundane to me in the following months. I needed it more than anything and started spending all my money on it. Soon enough, one of Simdar's buddies, Lesbit, said she had a job for me. Dealing. Apparently, the Ordinator guards caught on to some of the Khajiits in the city and their underhanded dealings of the drug. Lesbit said if a Dunmer like myself was handling the cells, then I'd attract less suspicion. Selling made good money for the first 2 years, and I began to see the Khajiits more like my own family. I was able to afford a nice apartment and quit my job at the docks. Later, I'd found out the only reason why Simdar worked at the docks was because he was receiving the product and shipping it out from there. Apparently, my mother's cousin had been taking a pretty septum of profits for hiding it from my granduncle and the authorities. I could care less about all of that as long as I could get high most nights. The depression hit pretty bad if I wasn't. I started taking some of the selling product in hopes no one would notice. My hair gradually started to fall out, and I lost my appetite, average signs of a skooma addiction. Lesbit and Sumdar started to look at me a bit different. It made me paranoid, thinking their pitiful faces was some poorly veiled malice. I started to shut them out when they stopped selling to me. I ended up homeless for a few months. Parents kicked me out once I realized what I had been taking. In my skooma-addled mind, I thought stealing from Sumdar would be the vengeance I deserved. Unsurprisingly, I was caught. I don't much like to think about this night. I feel a lot of shame for what I had become looking back. A dark, rainy night. Most folk of decent demeanor were inside, asleep, cozy in their beds. But I stalked down an alleyway, bare feet pressing against wet cobblestone, as the light from the street lamps reflected off the cold sidewalk, dancing with the pouring rain. I had found the window to their storeroom. The storeroom was on the street next to the docks. I slammed my fist through the cheap, brittle glass without a thought, anger and skooma lust leading my every action. With no plan but to steal and get high, I was ravaged like a starved beast, skooma taking my reason and self-awareness away at the first sip years ago. As I pocketed the bottles with fierce fervor, the door swung open with such violence that it struck me to my very bone. I tried desperately scrambling out the window, only to be met with a strong hand ripping me back, shards of glass cutting into my flesh as I whipped my arms and legs around frantically like some cornered rabbit. When I had stopped my flailing, I looked up to be met with Sumdar's warm yellow eyes, staring me down. I could see his angry features soften as our eyes met. In that moment, I had realized how far I had fallen. Sumdar looked at me for a long moment with a pained expression, before apathy leaked into his pupils. He turned to the door. I could see a few other Khajiit waiting there, staring in anticipation. Sumdar told them something in a language I didn't quite understand. Before I knew it, I was tied up and gagged, being dragged out of the city. I knew I had gone too far. I knew I was gonna die. And no matter how badly I wanted to keep my composure, it cracked as I thought back to all the people I fucked over. I wanted so badly to go home one more time. I didn't care if my mother nagged at me or my father yelled. I just wanted to hear them one more time. I know I was a failure of a son. Guilt and fear devoured my insides until I was left with unadulterated dread. Then we had stopped. Sumdar ripped off the bag over my head and looked down at me with unfeeling eyes. The rain hid the tears streaming down my face, but I gasped for air through the gag because the tears had filled up my nose. I was tired, dirty, emaciated from skooma tearing apart my body, and a deep, bubbling rage in the pit of my stomach roared out in whimpered cries. It's your fault, Sumdar. If you hadn't given me that bottle that night, who knows the man I could have been. You took that from me. I so badly wanted to scream those words into the very fabric of Mundus, but I could only manage a fearful glare. Sumdar's eyes softened once again. I am sorry, my friend. I should have known what it would have done to you. But you have left me with no choice. I hope to see you again on the warmer sands. Sumdar removed a dagger from its sheath, lit only by the moons peeking through the clouds to witness my demise. My eyes widened as I could feel my body shaking violently. I don't remember how many times he had stabbed me. Surely enough to kill me, enough for my red eyes to be blackened by my own blood, and left to stare at the moons as I could feel each breath becoming heavier and heavier. Sumdar left me to die that night. And what I thought were my last moments, I mourned my own death. Anger washed away by the midnight rain, only left with the shame I had become. And it all went black. Surely I'm still here since you are reading this post. As to how, it's a long story, and not related to this thread, so perhaps I'll tell it another time.
I feel bad for the people that have to go through this. Be it man, mer, or beast, no one should have to go through this. But that's all I have for today, folks. You got work tomorrow, or school, or writing Elder Scrolls fanfic and pretending like it's real. But as always, don't dream about wheat-based byproducts.